everyone. Welcome to the October 18th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host Craig Milkowski, and I am David Aragona, of course. This week on the podcast, we're going to talk about some state-bred races. There's a New York-bred card in New York, a Maryland-bred card down at Laurel, and we'll talk about one race from Remington Park actually tonight down in Oklahoma for those Oklahoma breds. But we'll begin by talking about some races from Keeneland, the two major graded stakes this weekend, the Raven Run on Saturday and the Dowager on Sunday. Before we get to all of that, though, I just want to mention a couple of things. We will be working on our TimeformUS Breeders' Cup package, which you can find out more information about on dref.com and timeformus.com. Both Craig and I will be contributing to that, analyzing all of the Breeders' Cup races in written form. There's also a piece on the European contenders by our previous colleague, Jamie Lynch, who works for Sky Sports. He does an excellent job talking about those European runners and how they're meant to do in the Breeders' Cup. So look for that. And also, Craig and I, next week on our podcast, in place of the typical recap show and the forecast for the upcoming weekend's races, we'll be doing a Breeders' Cup preview, I believe, on Tuesday for the Pacecast. We'll preview the Breeders' Cup Friday races. I think the pre-entries are coming out between Monday and Wednesday, so we'll talk about some of those. And on the Friday show, a week from today, we'll talk about the Saturday races. So, Craig, looking forward to all of that. But today, we're focusing on this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, we sure are. I'm actually heading to Remington Park tonight for big Oklahoma Classics nights, one of the bigger nights they have there. So always good to get out and see some live racing. As much as I like sitting in front of my computer, I actually like going and seeing the animals in person. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, I took a glance at that Remington Park card. I mean, you obviously asked that I look at the one race, but I mean, there are some big fields and some competitive fields, competitive groups of horses there. So looks like a fun card. I hope you have a nice time out there. But before we get to that, that's at the end of the show, let's begin with those two graded stakes that I mentioned at the top, the Raven Run and the Dowager. The Raven Run's probably where the concentration of quality is this weekend. I thought this was a pretty interesting race for the 3-year-old fillies. Got some up-and-coming lightly raced horses, some runners that we know from earlier in the year from the Kentucky Oaks and the horse coming out of the Cotillion, some turnbacks, some horses stretching out in distance. I thought it's a really competitive race. How did you see it?
I agree. It is a super competitive race. There's some really interesting horses in here from a betting perspective, I think. Indian Pride, who was a really promising Chad Brown's filly who won her debut easily, is jumping right in the grade 2 company here, and she may be one of the favorites. The pace projector actually has her alone on an easy lead. Not generally the kind of horses I'm going to gravitate towards betting at a short price, but really interesting field for me. Curious to hear who you like in here.
Yeah, Indian Pride's kind of a funny horse for me to know what to do with, because on one hand, I was really impressed by the debut. She had been touted forever as a horse that could really run for Chad Brown. On the other hand, that was not the strongest field we've seen in New York. I mean, the horses that finished behind her, they're just not that great. So I think the margin of victory is a little bit exaggerated. Obviously, she earned a nice speed figure, and the pace projector indicates that she's going to have a pretty favorable setup in here. She's got to get the extra furlong, though. She feels like the kind of horse that could get bet down. So I was kind of on the fence with her. I'll use her defensively, but I wanted to go in another direction. I kind of have a similar thought about Royal Charlotte. She's another one that's going to take money for Chad Brown. And I just didn't think that Prioress was that strong of a race once break even didn't show up. So I wanted to kind of look elsewhere. I mean, I was intrigued by horses like First Star, who's coming in from California, as well as Horologist, who's turning back because she really has gotten good lately. I ultimately decided to land on Irish Mischief for my top pick. We had obviously talked about this horse in relation to the Charlestown Oaks a few weeks ago, and I just thought she didn't get the right trip that day. They really kind of misread the pace situation because it looked like there was a lot of speed on paper, and they made the decision to rate her. The speed just sort of never really developed into a fast pace, and she ended up getting caught in behind horses, getting ranked in the early going. All things considered, I thought she actually did pretty well to get second. Her two prior speed figures from Ellis Park and Churchill Downs make her pretty competitive here. And we've seen that being outside of Keeneland is not a bad place to be. So I just think she might work out the right trip.
Yeah, unfortunately for you, I actually landed on the same horse. I like Irish Mistress for the same reasons you mentioned. I'm kind of drawing a line through her last race, and not that she ran poorly, because she obviously didn't. She just didn't quite run up to her potential. I like that outside draw. She gets Mike Smith in the saddle. Brad Cox is always tough, so she was the one I like. I originally really was leaning towards Horologist, but I just don't like the turn back with the not quite as much speed and the much shorter price. I do think she'll be a contender in here, and I had similar thoughts about Royal Charlotte. She's a good enough filly, but I just think she's probably a little overrated. I think she's the morning line favorite in here. She got a dream trip her last 2 wins where she sat off a pretty fast paces and was able to win. So no real knocks against her. Just the short price kind of turned me off, and that's what pointed me in the direction of Irish Mischief.
Yeah, I've got a feeling we're not going to get that 12-1 on Irish Mischief, but frankly, I'd be okay with 6 or 8-1 because I kind of think that's the price that she should be in this field. So I'll key on her, but I would use her with a bunch of other horses because I do think this is a race where you can spread quite a bit. And the same is really true about the Dowager on Sunday, going 1.5 miles on the turf for the fillies and mares. This is just, a totally wide open race. I guess the horse to beat is Gentle Ruler, the number 3, because she's won, I believe, 5 out of her last 6 starts. Her one loss was that graded stakes attempt in the way at 2 back, but she's really just been rock solid for Ian Wilkes. And if she works out the right trip, I think she'll be tough. It's just, is she going to work out the right trip in this large field with not a ton of speed signed on?
Yeah, I'm a little bit different. I think looking at this race a little differently than you, and I think she's actually pretty strong in here, just because I don't think it's a very strong field, even for a grade 3. It came up kind of weak in my opinion. Her main rival is probably Alicia's World, who's never gone this far. I don't think she's ever even gone past 1.25 miles. I would say her best races this year have come at 1.25 miles, so maybe the extra distance will help. But I think Gentle Ruler is a pretty good, solid favorite in here, and definitely the most likely to win the race.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say that. I don't know how good she really is because she's been beating up on kind of the same horse in all of her wins, that horse being the Brad Cox trainee Gaining, who she beat in the Ramsey Farm, the Robert Dick Memorial, as well as the Kirtana before that. And I think we've seen at this point that Gaining is just not very good. She's okay, but she's not really a top-level graded stakes kind of horse. And Gentle Ruler was kind of exposed a little bit in that way at Saratoga because that wasn't the strongest field. And it was arguably the toughest test that she's gotten. And she didn't really put forth her top effort that day. So she's the horse to beat. I think it's fair to say she's the most likely winner. I just didn't think that she was some kind of favorite that I really wanted to go lean on too heavily in this spot. I agree with you about Elisea's World. I think the distance is the question, although she's obviously good enough. But I thought there were plenty of other horses to consider. The number 12, Get Explicit, actually finished ahead of Gentle Ruler in that Wea 3-back at Saratoga. She ran fine in the Glens Falls 2-back behind Mississippi, who returned and was that good second to Sister Charlie. And I know she disappointed last time out at Woodbine, but that race was going much shorter. It was just wired on the front end. It looks like it was just a prep for this race. So I don't really want to hold that against her. I think Get Explicit's going to be a price, and she's not that much worse than Gentle Ruler, if at all. And the other horse that really interests me here is the number 2, Lamuna, because she had real trouble in that yellow ribbon 2-back. If you watch that race coming around the far turn, Mario Gutierrez kind of moved her up inside, one path inside of Beau Recall, and just things tightened up as she was making that move, and she had to steady to the back of the pack at the time when she would have been commencing a rally. So that just really cost her all chance that day. And then last time in the Ramsey Farm, she was beaten 2 lengths by Gentle Ruler, but she didn't have the smoothest run. She was kind of in behind a wall of horses coming down the stretch. Joe Rosario never really got her into the clear like he likes to do in these races. She's getting the switch to Joe Bravo here. There's not a ton of pace, but I'm intrigued by her stretching out to the 1.5 miles because I do think she has stamina. Her best race is going the 1.25 miles 3-back, and I thought she really finished up strongly that day. And she'll be, somewhere in the 5 or 6-1 range, if not higher. So I would take a shot with her possibly over Get Explicit and use Gentle Ruler sort of defensively.
Yeah, I can see that. Her race 3-back was definitely good. Like you said, it was at 10 furlongs. The pace was really slow, and she was still able to overcome it and get up the win by a neck. So I don't have any real problem with these. I just was a little, it's just not the strongest field. So you're probably right to go a different direction and go away from the short prices. I'm just not as anti-Gentle Ruler as you.
All right, let's move on to some of those state-bred races, and we'll begin in New York because they're running a ton of New York-bred races. It's kind of like their Breeders' Cup card for all the divisions, these New York-breds that we've been seeing throughout the year. I obviously have to handicap all of them for my NYRA analysis, but we'll touch on a few, beginning with the Mohawk, which goes as race 4 for the older Colts and Geldings. And Voodoo Song looks like he's going to get a pretty favorable trip in this race. If you look at the TimeformUS pace projector, he's on that clear lead with the blue bar indicating it's favors on under the lead situation. Is Voodoo Song back in form now? Can we really trust him at this point, or are you still have some reservations about him?
Yeah, I'm not sure. My gut feeling is he probably is back in form. It's just the question is it really good enough? And he certainly on his best can beat these horses. He's done it before. He's beaten better fields than this. And he was really game last time, but I'm just not sure I trust him. It's, these same hard-knocking horses, they face each other over and over again in these New York bred races, which is really good from a handicapping perspective. It's a really good test when you're trying to get these. But, I mean, when you look at a horse like Dot Matrix, he actually had caught Voodoo Song fairly early and was able to outgame him to the wire. And I don't put a whole lot of stock in the pace projector in these races. Not that the pace doesn't favor Voodoo Song, but pretty much barring some crazy speed horse like he faced earlier in the year, he's always going to be in the front, and he's not really going to slow it down. He's going to go pretty quick. So he basically runs the same race every time. I'm not sure he offers a lot of value at 3-1. So, I'm not saying that he can't win the race. He certainly can, but he's not a horse I'm going to be keying on for sure.
No, I tend to agree with that. I think he's a horse that I respect. I'm just not sure that he's really as good as he once was, and people might be a little bit fooled by that last race because he really did get a very favorable setup that day. It was on the inner turf course, which can be a lot more speed favoring than the Widener turf course, which this race has run over. And I'm just not sure he's going to have he's going to be quite as tough as some people might believe. And Dot Matrix beat him fair and square last time, as you were alluding to. And Dot Matrix did get a very perceptive ride by Luis Saez, who kind of placed him much closer to the pace than he usually does. And hopefully he does the same thing here because that'll make Dot Matrix tough once again. The horse that I would go to, though, is Gucci Factor. If you remember the start of that Ashley T. Cole, Gucci Factor sort of acted up, reared up a little bit. The starter had to sort of correct him right as the gates were opening. And he ended up spotting the field by about half a dozen lengths. All things considered, he did pretty well to only lose the race by 3.5 lengths, considering how much ground he lost at the start. And he was in really good form going back to the summer. He missed some time during Saratoga, but I thought that last race actually indicates that maybe he's still in top form because he actually did pretty well to finish as close as he did, 1 mile and an eighth, not even necessarily his best distance. He's cutting back a furlong here. And I just thought Gucci Factor might be a bigger price than he otherwise would be if he actually got to run last time. And to me, he just makes a lot of sense as the right alternative to Voodoo Song.
Yeah, he was going to be my top selection in here as well. I don't want to go over the same things you just said. I think the start really cost him last time, and he's not a horse that has habitual problems at the gate. You have to be wary of that sometimes when you factor in starts, but he is my top pick. The one horse I actually really don't like in here is Cross Border, which might sound a little funny. He got the best TimeformUS speed figure last time out with a 124. When he was second in the Hearst Classic behind Arklow. But he was fifth, only beaten 2.5 lengths. But I really don't think that. I think that race was a bit of a phony race is what I'm getting at. It's obviously at a much longer distance. I think he just kind of sucked along. He didn't really make any moves. So at only 5-1 on the morning line, he's a horse I'm not interested in at all.
Yeah, I was actually just about to ask you about him because he's kind of a horse you do have to have an opinion about because if you believe that last speed figure, then he's just arguably the horse to beat in here. I tend to agree with you, though. That last race, that was kind of the opportunity for him because it was a really favorable pace setup going 1.5 miles, and they almost squandered the opportunity by not sending him to the lead. Mike Maker, he tends to be able to do that. He tends to be able to get these horses to really improve going these marathon distances. He just has a knack for it. We saw him do it in that race at Keeneland the other day in the is that the Sycamore? I'm forgetting the names of these races. One of those.
Yeah, the Sycamore, just yesterday. Yep.
Yeah. And I just don't think they always carry their form when they cut back in distance. So I agree with your assessment of Cross Border. I'm not sure he's quite competitive with this field, but I mean, there are plenty of others to consider. I think Offering Plan, he's always right there. I'm just not sure he's going to get the right pace situation. So I kind of agree with you here that it's really about Gucci Factor over at Dot Matrix and Voodoo Song. Let's move on to a couple of the sprint races they're running at Belmont on Saturday, beginning with the males in the Hudson going 6.5 furlongs as race 6. And another situation where the pace projector is predicting the horse on the lead to have an advantage. I don't necessarily trust the horse that's going to be on the lead in this race. I Love Lulu, because it seems like he's kind of tailed off recently. And if he collapses like he has in his last 2 starts, I'm thinking maybe that opens the race up for some of the closers that otherwise might have been disadvantaged.
Yeah, I totally agree about I Love Lulu. I know for sure his last race, he had a similar situation in the pace projector. He set a slow pace and he quit anyway. He was on the lead and just kind of backed out of it. I guess you could argue maybe he's rounding back into form. The race was better than the one before that, but I'm not a fan of his. So despite the pace projector, and not a fan in this spot, I won't be betting him. I'm not one to gravitate towards favorites very often, but I do think Built to Suit is going to be really tough in here. He's had 2 tough trips from a pace scenario. The first one was off a long layoff where he got no pace to run at all at Saratoga, and I think it was the Morrissey, and he was just beaten by Celtic Chaos by a nose. And if I remember right, that photo, I would have sworn he won watching it live. I was really surprised he didn't. And then he came back and just ran really well last time, just had a couple lengths off I Love Lulu, who was setting that slow pace, exploded home and blew these away. So I think he's going to be really tough.
Yeah, as you know, I'm not one to really gravitate towards favorites either. Quite the opposite, actually. But I do agree with you. I think Built to Suit's going to be pretty tough in this race. And I mean, it's funny. You don't often see a horse out closing Celtic Chaos at the end of a race, but he was actually moving faster than that horse at the end of the Morrissey. And that's partly because he got shuffled back right after the start, did Built to Suit, and he was kind of behind Celtic Chaos in the early going, which is not where you want to be. I agree with everything you said about his last race. I thought it was very visually impressive against actually a decent open company field. And I'm just hoping he doesn't get too badly outrun in the early going, because he's got that really strong kick at the end, and I think this time he can get the jump on Celtic Chaos, and that's just going to make him really tough to beat. The horse that was kind of a difficult call for me is Gold for the King, because I think you can make the argument that maybe if I Love Lulu doesn't run well, then maybe Gold for the King just inherits the lead and falls into the right trip. I just feel like he's been a short price so many times recently, and I just wonder if he's ever going to get back to those really high speed figures he ran going back to last winter and last fall.
Yeah, he's the horse I'm definitely against. He's similar to I Love Lulu. He was on the lead last time, a clear, easy lead, setting a slow pace at Saratoga. I think that was one of the bad rail days, but his rider was pretty wise to get off of it, and he just couldn't hold off Celtic Chaos and Built the Suit. So I don't really see any reason that's going to change here. Like you said, maybe he could trip out and just inherit a lead if I Love Lulu backs up, but I still don't see him holding off of particularly Built the Suit and even Celtic Chaos to a lesser extent.
Well, I hope we don't continue agreeing for all of these races, because we have a pretty similar thought about those two. Moving on to the Iroquois for the fillies and mare sprinters. I thought this race was really competitive, and there are a lot of different ways you can go. It's not the strongest group that we've seen in this division going back past years, so I think that really opens it up to some horses that you might not otherwise consider. I ended up going for one of the short prices, though, so maybe that's a little counterintuitive based on what how I just assessed the race. But I like Satisfy. Maybe she's going to be the favorite in this spot, and perhaps I'm just taking an underlay on a horse that's a little bit of a question mark. But to me, she was really good last year when she was second in Miss Iroquois back in 2018. I really liked her effort that day. Then she easily won a 1 mile race at Aqueduct. She obviously got a setback. She was off for a long time. Her return race at Monmouth, though, last time out, I know it looks disappointing at first glance. When you watch it, though, I think you can actually make some excuses, because that field was really bunched coming around the far turn. Joe Bravo found himself in behind some long shots, and he just could never really get into a situation where he was about to commence a rally, because he was just in behind this wall of horses, and he kind of wedged her in between horses at the quarter pole. She just didn't have a comfortable trip, even though she lost at 3-2. I thought she had some excuses, and also the 2 horses that finished first and second in that race, Bronx Beauty and Miss Locust Point, we've talked about them on the podcast before. They post some pretty high speed figures from time to time, and they're okay. So I don't think it's a huge disgrace that she lost that race. Hoping she can take a step forward and that she can show a little more speed in this spot. I just think she might be better than this field if she gets back into form, though that's obviously a bit of a question mark.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with her. As you mentioned, the two she lost to last time, they seem to race against each other a lot. They're obviously quick fillies. I went a little different direction. For once, I am going to go with the speed figure horse in here, and that was Pause for the Cause. I really liked her last race where she was able to press a fast pace. She kind of exploded. I think it was her best effort she's ever had in her career. She drew away pretty easily. She got a big 121 that day, which is much higher than anybody else in the field. The runner-up has already come back to win, albeit at a lower class, but won pretty easily this week, I believe it was. So, but it's going to be Pause for the Cause for me if she's anywhere near that 4-1 morning line.
Yeah, I'm afraid of her. I would put her, Holiday Disguise, and Carrera Cat kind of in the same boat as horses that can all win this race that I'd be afraid of. Pause for the Cause. My one reservation about her last race, while I agree with everything you said about it being one of her best races in a while, it did feel like the rail was a little. It was kind of the place to be. It wasn't a huge bias. It wasn't like some of those biases we saw at Saratoga this summer, but it was an advantage that those first couple of weeks at Belmont. And I thought that was the case on September 12th. I'm not saying that it would have made her lose that race, but I think it might have exaggerated the margin of victory a little bit. So I question that slightly, but she's got back races that make her very competitive. And you mentioned the pace projector. There's not a ton of speed in this race. So I would definitely use her. I'd use Carrera Cat. And I'd even throw in More Mischief, who's an up-and-comer for Chad Brown. I liked her last race at Saratoga. I don't think she even loves the slop. And she just feels like a 3-year-old that might be hitting her stride right now. So I'd use her as a long shot. But I thought there were a few ways you can go in this race.
Yeah, no doubt. It's what we get on these state-bred days. You get a lot of wide open races. Horses, just a lot of horses point to these days. So I'm sure we'll see some effort, some big efforts. Some of them will surprise us. There always seem to be a couple that are hard to picture on paper that step up and win at big prices. And maybe this would be one of those races. I'm hoping not with our selections, though.
I thought one of the most intriguing of these state-bred races for the New York breds was the Empire Distaff, an 11-horse field going as race 10 at Belmont on Saturday. And you've got some 3-year-olds stepping up in class, or actually one in particular. You've got some older horses that would have been around at this level for a while. You've got an interesting pace projector because there are a few horses in here that really do seem like they want to be either right on the lead or in that stalking position out in the clear. A few horses who are looking to get the same trip in this spot. They cut this race back to a mile this year. It's been a little bit longer in the past. I think that's an interesting dynamic. Where did you go in here?
You know, I don't really have a strong selection in here. This is one I would probably go really deep. All the favorites, I mean, they could win. Newly Minted, Radickowski, I guess I should know how to say that with a name like Milkowski. So hopefully I'm at least close with that one. They look solid, but I really think this race is wide open. We talked about Newly Minted before. I assume she's the 3-year-old you're talking about stepping up. I'm a little leery of her drawing the rail, particularly at a short price with other speed in here. So I'll probably go a different direction from her. But like I said, I would spread in here playing horizontal bets for sure.
Yeah, I really do respect her Newly Minted's talent. I think she's better than her speed figures even really indicate because she's won a lot of her races quite easily. And she did show that she's got that dimension to rate in the Bowery 3-back when she won that 7-furlong race from just off the pace, taking some dirt early in the race. So that makes me a little bit less concerned than I would have been about her drawing the rail here because I think she's going to get that stalking trip. But I could also see the pace really heating up in this spot. I know the pace projector is not predicting a fast pace, but I think it's really dependent on what the number 3 horse Might Be does in this race because she has been very aggressive when she's had blinkers on in a lot of her recent races. They took the blinkers off last time when she made that first start for Bruce Levine. And I don't know if it was just the blinkers, but she just was not interested in running at all that day. And she just steadily backed up through the pack. Putting the blinkers back on, if she is as aggressive as she has been in the past, this could really be a hot pace because horses like Newly Minted and Radickowski, they really do want to be up close early in addition to a runner like Out of Orbit, who also won in gate to wire fashion last time. So I could imagine this pace being honest at least. And I'm a fan of Midnight Disguise. It feels like I always pick her, but I really do think she's going to get the right trip in this race for Linda Rice. She's coming off a bit of a layoff, but I've always thought a mile is really just the perfect distance for her because she's not really the stamina type to go like the mile and an eighth around 2 turns, and 6 furlongs that she tried to do last time is just too short for her. So she's going to get the right trip here. I think Joel Rosario was actually a pretty good fit for a late runner like this. And if she runs back to that race she ran in the Critical Eye 2 back behind Catherine the Wise, I think she's got a real shot to post just a minor upset, because I do think that Newly Minted and Raduszkowski are going to take a lot of money off those blowout wins that they posted in their last starts.
Yeah, if you twisted my arm, she would be my top selection in here. I'm a big fan of Linda Rice. She always seems to put her horses in the right spot. It's hard to argue. If she sends them to the gate, they're normally ready to go and in a good position. She draws a good post for the 1-turn mile. So, yeah, no problem with her whatsoever.
Yeah, the one other horse that I would throw in that might work out the right trip if the pace really does heat up is the number 8, Held Accountable. She's going to be a big price in this race. She didn't like the turf last time. She was involved in a slow-paced race 2 back when she lost her stablemate, and then 3 back she got beat by the good 3-year-old Queen of Bees. So I think her form's a little better than it might seem, and maybe she could pick up some pieces. Probably not going to win the race, but I would use her in exotics.
Yeah, the other horse I would mention is No Hain, No Gain. And I mentioned her negatively, really, because she got a big speed figure for me at Finger Lakes last time. But that's one I'm definitely reviewing. I'm not sure, the race hasn't come back very strong. Horses haven't run back very well out of it. So I'm a little shaky on that 113 or whatever it is she had.
Yeah, those Finger Lakes figures, I'd imagine they're tough to make, and they're always tough to assess when the horses come to Naira, because the numbers, even though they might seem legitimate at Finger Lakes, they don't always hold up when they face tougher company, as can often be the case when horses are stepping up in class. Moving on to the 1 graded stakes that they're running this week in New York, it's the Athenia on Sunday for the fillies and mares on the turf, and I would say that a horse shipping in from California is probably the horse to beat. Maybe it sounds weird to say that because usually the California horses coming to New York are up against it. But Simply Breathless, I think she's been facing some tougher runners in her recent races. Neil Drysdale, when he ships a horse into an East Coast track, usually means business. She was 3rd in a couple of Grade 3 races recently, but she was facing horses like Juliet Foxtrot and Mitchell Road. They're a little better than these, maybe. So I thought she's probably the most likely winner.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with Simply Breathless. She's a legitimate morning line favorite, but I went a different direction with the number 9 Zenobia. I kind of liked her last race. I like the post she drew in here outside. She ran that was her best race last time, second race off the layoff. So I'm looking for some improvement in here. She gets Johnny Velasquez, and I think she's going to be up close to a pretty slow pace. The pace projector has Candy Store setting the pace up front, which I don't have a problem with, but I think she'll be pretty close to it and just kind of inherit the lead. And I'm hoping at a fairly decent price, she'll be able to hold off a horse like Simply Breathless.
Yeah, I'll admit I don't know exactly who I'm picking yet in this race. Zenobia is interesting to me because she actually does have some European form that makes her a contender in here. She actually was a Group 3 winner over there in Ireland. And I think her last race for Jonathan Thomas does say that she's getting back into that kind of form. So she's intriguing to me. I don't know if I'm going to pick her on top yet. I'd also give a look to the 2 horses coming out of that September 22nd allowance race at Belmont, where Sweet By and By wired the field. Sweet By and By got a really nice trip that day, just kind of dawdling along on the lead, and she was able to just sprint for home. I'm not sure she's going to get that same trip with a horse like Candy Store in the race, assuming that they do ride her a little more aggressively. Victorine, I don't totally trust her because she doesn't have the strongest finishing kick on her, but she was definitely compromised in that September 22nd race because the pace was just so slow that day. So I think if they go a little bit faster up front, then Victorine's got a better chance. I'm not sure if she's quite good enough to win, but she's one that I would use somewhere. Simply Breathless might just be better than these. I'm not sure how short a price I want to take on her, though.
Yeah, I agree. The other horse I'd mention will be the 4 Andina Del Sur. She just always seems to run a decent race. She has tactical speed. So I'm not going to totally throw her out of this either.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty competitive race, and you could make a case for really all 5 of those runners that we just mentioned. Let's move on to some different state breds, going over to Maryland for the Maryland Million Sprint at Laurel, one of many state bred stakes on their card on Saturday. And we've got those 2 hard-knocking Maryland breds, Lewisfield and Lockheed, who just seem to hook up and trade decisions in a bunch of these races. But there's a new shooter in this spot. Call Paul, the 3-year-old, who we've seen in a bunch of top races for the 3-year-old sprinters all year long. He's moving back into state-bred company here, and he's been tough against state-breds the few times that he's tried it in Pennsylvania. So I'm wondering if his form could translate pretty well into this Maryland-bred spot.
Yeah, one of these days I'm going to have to read up on the breeding story for him, because last out he shows some kind of race that's restricted, something to do with Delaware breds. He has some PA bred races. Now he's in a Maryland sired race. So I don't know what's going on with him. I don't try to keep up with that stuff. But this is a case where it's the TimeformUS pace projector has it coded as a fast pace, and I actually believe it. So I'm going to take a shot against a horse like Call Paul or Lewis Field. Horses that really like to be up on or near the lead. They run their best races that way. I think Lewis Field actually won this race last year by almost a football field when he was right up on the pace before pulling away late. But I'm going in a different direction. And it's a case where I'm not necessarily going with the best late pace. That's Lackey, who you talked about. He has a 90 or 86 late pace rating, which is the best in the field. And I do think he's going to run a good race. He should get a nice setup. But I'm actually leaning towards a 2-horse. I really like the 10-1 price on Taco Supreme. He ran a nice 117 TimeformUS speed figure where he was outside in a 3-horse duel. I guess you'd say 3-horse battle, right? You need 2 for a duel. But I really like this horse. I think he's in top form. He's cutting back to his best distance, which I think is clearly 6 furlongs. All his best races have come at that distance. And I like that he has tactical speed, but he doesn't have to be up on or near the lead. And I really like the price of this horse in there.
Yeah, he was kind of a difficult call for me because he's got that 122 speed figure going all the way back to March 31st. And if he runs that kind of race here, he's going to be very tough. I agree with you about his last race. I thought it was pretty strong. It's just he's disappointed a number of times in between there. He's been very short prices on a bunch of occasions. But this day, he's going to be a big price, so I'm not going to knock you picking him. He might work out the right trip in here. I'm going for a shorter price. I just think Lockie is going to work out the right trip this time. Really, for him, it is all about the pace and the trip and whether or not he can turn the tables on Lewis Field. I think this time he's just going to get the right setup. He's really a horse that just loves Laurel. They ran him outside of Laurel in his 3 prior starts. Last time out in the Mr. Prospector at Monmouth, I just thought it didn't really set up for him because he was actually up close and rating in second place moving down the backstretch. And it seemed like Horatio Caramanos almost said to himself, I'm riding a closer. I can't be up stalking the pace. And he drags him to the back of the pack, even though Lockie was doing it so easily. And it turned out to be the wrong move because he put him in behind horses and he could just never make up that ground thereafter. I think other than that, he's been in pretty good form. And if he gets the right setup here, I just think he's going to be pretty tough to hold off. But I do respect Call Paul. Call Paul, his last race was visually impressive. I know he was beating nothing at Delaware, but I always respect this barn. And I'm not going to be shocked if he comes up with a big performance moving back to state-bred company.
No, I won't either. And like you, I think Lockie's the most likely winner in here. He's just a little bit of a shorter price, so that's why I went away. That last race at Monmouth, we talked about that race, actually. It was a really strong race. It was a couple Jason Service horses, I think, ran 1-2, or maybe it was a Jorge Navarro horse in there. But Lasting Legacy, who won's in really good form, and there was no catching him. He was really strong that day. So this is a really good race. I love Maryland Million Day, being from Baltimore originally. I was actually at the inaugural Maryland Million many years ago. I think it was 1986. I saw the old New York bred King Swan won this race. So I will definitely be tuned in to Laurel. Big fan of this day. I think Jim McKay, the old ABC broadcaster, actually started this. So it's a tradition that's held for a long time, and I hope it's here for many more years.
Oh, that's really cool. I didn't know the history behind it, but I always like these state-bred days, as you were alluding to earlier, that you just get these horses that sometimes get overshadowed. They really have their time in the spotlight, and they're often some pretty competitive spots. And sticking with the state-breds, let's move to your home state of Oklahoma, Remington Park, that card that we mentioned at the top of the show that they're running tonight. And I know you had a horse that you were interested in the Oklahoma Classics Cup, which goes as race 9.
I did. The obvious horse to beat is Shotgun Cowboy. He's won this race already 3 times. He won the Oklahoma Derby as a 3-year-old. He won this race in 2015. He missed it in 2016, so he didn't get beat. And then he won it again in 2017 and 2018. But he is coming back. It's his first race since April. He hasn't been in great form of late. And more importantly, he's a horse that runs all his best races on the lead, and that could really be a problem in here. He seems to have lost some of his early zip. The pace projector shows him more than a few lengths back and forth. So I'm actually leaning towards a 3-year-old in here, and that's a 3-horse D-Taz. He's a horse who ran in the Springboard Mile here last year, which is the big 2-year-old race at Remington, has a big purse and even offers some, I think it's 10 Derby points towards the Kentucky Derby now. He ran fairly well that day. He finished mid-pack, but I like his form this year. This will be the third race for him off the layoff. The first race, he didn't do a whole lot of running, but his second start when he stretched out the 7 furlongs, the pace was slow and he was right up on it, and he wound up pulling away to win by 8 lengths. His TimeformUS speed figure was only a 97 that day, but it was an improvement off of his prior race. The 101, it was a 101 for final time, so there was obviously some more in the tank for him. And I just like his 2-year-old form. I think he's going to run much faster than he did last time. And it won't take a whole bunch more to win this race. Like I said, Shotgun Cowboy hasn't been in the best form. The other horses in here are horses who run in the mid-100s on their best days, maybe 110. So D-Taz as a 3-year-old is a horse that I think can improve and is going to run a better race. And he also gets a weight break in here, too.
I think you always have to expect an up-and-coming 3-year-olds because they have that room for improvement, and sometimes you can catch prices on them, so I'm not going to argue with that. What do you make of the other horse that's a short price in the morning line, Deal Driven? He's kind of a funny Oklahoma bred because he's buy into mischief out of a Tisnow mare. Not really an Oklahoma pedigree there, but he's been running mostly at parks. Is Remington a tough venue to ship into, or do you think he's going to be okay coming from that kind of class level?
I think he would be fine. Remington's not a hard track to ship into. Horses ship in for the bigger races like the Springboard or the Oklahoma Derby all the time, as we see, and run just well. My bigger concern with him would be shipping out of Parks. Seems to be a little bit problematic sometimes. Parks is definitely a weird, quirky track, and some horses don't always carry their form when they leave. And my big deal with him is at 2-1, he just doesn't really have a big edge on anybody in here. So I'm not saying he can't win the race. He surely can, but he's a horse I like to be near the front. We think the pace is going to be pretty quick. So at that short odds, I'm going to take a look elsewhere.
Some good insights there. So those races, again, just a reminder, they'll be happening just in a few hours tonight, a little bit after we post this TimeformUS forecast. So, Craig, it's a pleasure to discuss these races. Weekend. Again, remember, look forward to our podcast next week on Tuesday and Friday. Tuesday, we'll be discussing the Breeders' Cup Friday races, obviously before they're drawn, but we should have the pre-entries by that point. So we'll talk about those 5 2-year-old races on Friday. And on Friday's podcast, a week from today, we'll be discussing the Saturday Breeders' Cup races. The pre-entries will definitely be out by that point. So we'll talk about those 9 races for the 3-year-old and older horses. So, Craig, looking forward to all of that next week. Looking forward to working on the TimeformUS Breeders' Cup package, which will be available on Breeders' Cup week. And as always, you can tune in to our podcast, the TimeformUS Forecast and the TimeformUS Pacecast on drf.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form podcast channel. Thanks for listening this week, guys. We'll be back on Tuesday.